She likes that.
The power. Welcome everybody. I'm Ava Chin. I'm president of the board of Think Chinatown. Welcome to our space. And welcome to our 7th annual Chinatown Arts Festival. Some of you might not realize this. It started out 7 years ago as Chinatown Arts Week, and now it's grown to Chinatown Arts Festival. We have this brochure, lots of events. This is our 3rd one for this year. And coming up in a few days, on Saturday, we have shadow puppetry back here in this space. We're going to have a art exhibit of art that was created by our community inside moon cake boxes. So it's an annual thing that we have. We ask people to submit and bring their most creative selves. And we're going to have Chinese opera on the 26th in the Bamboo Garden on Essex Street, which is just a few blocks from here. And then we're going to finish off Arts Festival with a big block party on the street that we successfully got co-named Corky Lee Way. Now, when we were putting the festival together, we were dreaming up all of the different programs that we could do. And give me a second here.
I'll turn it on.
The inspiration for tonight was this. This is sheet music from 1910. And it's called Chinatown, My Chinatown, music by Gene Schwartz. So, the exhibit that we have in the gallery out front, Making or Faking Chinatown, is part of the same theme. You know, when you think of Chinatown, when people think of Chinatown, what do they think of? Chinatown has been represented in so many different ways through the years, sometimes in less complimentary light.
Don't call it the bloody angle.
Do not call it the bloody angle, I will knock you down. A lot of times the labels that are pasted on Chinatown are by yellow journalists. So if you don't know that term, yellow journalism, look it up. But how do we see ourselves? How do the people who really make up Chinatown and who have been part of the history of Chinatown really see Chinatown? So in putting together today's program, I contacted Ed Lin, and we started asking some ideas, like what would make a great program, and that's how we came up with Chinatown, My Chinatown tonight, with 6 fantastic writers, some fiction, some memoir, and we're just gonna really riff and explore like what Chinatown means to us all collectively from the people who really know it. All right, I'm gonna hand this over to Ed. If as you were coming in, we have a little exercise outside too. We have some snacks out there. Get a bean from one of our volunteers and vote for which snack makes you think of Chinatown the most. Feel free to get a snack, get a drink. Also, we have our friends from You and Me Books here to sell some of the books. So make sure you don't leave without a book. And just finally, Think Chinatown is a not-for-profit, and this is our lovely new space, almost completely renovated. There's still things to do here. And if you enjoy our program, sign up for our mailing list, and make a donation. Every little bit helps, and I'm so happy you're all here. Thank you.
It's not a flex. 大家好. All right, that's where the Mandarin ends there. Thank you so much for coming out to Chinatown, My Chinatown. And everybody's Chinatown is a little bit different, just like looking at a rainbow. Did you know that there's not a single rainbow? Everybody observing the rainbow sees a different one. We're getting almost subliminal already. Okay, well, enough about me and my musings. I want to tell you about our first reader, Radha Vatsal's new historical crime novel, Number 10 Doyers Street, coming March 2025, takes place in New York City's Chinatown in the early 1900s. She is also the author of the acclaimed Kitty Weeks mystery novel set in World War I era New York. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Born and raised in Mumbai, India, Radha earned her PhD in film history from Duke University and has worked as a film curator, political speechwriter, and freelance journalist. She lives in New York City. Give it up for Radha. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Just, all you do is just this little hand. Just up and down.
Wow. Thanks to Ed and Amy for inviting me. I'm pretty nervous to be here. This is the first time I'm reading from this book, which comes out in March. As Ed said, it's set in Chinatown in the early 1900s, and it's the story of the legendary gangster Mott Duck, whose young daughter was taken away from him by the Society for the Prevention of Children. So the novel is really about the court case that he fights to win her back, and also at the same time there was a concurrent plan by the city to raise Chinatown. So the novel brings these two things together. Before I start reading, I just also want to say I was so taken by this story of Mott and his daughter, but I really struggled with the perspective from which to write this novel. I knew I couldn't sort of write it in third person directly, and that I needed a narrator. But I felt like I couldn't do an Indian narrator, so I was thinking, oh, how am I going to do this? Am I going to have to ventriloquize my thoughts through? I needed an outsider narrator, but am I going to have to put them in the mouth of a white person? How am I going to do this? And I really struggled with it for 4 or 5 years, writing different versions of the book, until I finally said, whatever. New York City had 2 million people in the 1900s, and I'm going to make just an imaginative leap and say one of those people, just one out of those 2 million people, was an Indian woman. And the moment I made that leap, I in fact discovered that there were Indian women who came to the US in the 19th and early centuries, 20th centuries, and some of them actually wrote about their experiences. So the narrator of the novel is an Indian woman who wanders around New York in trousers and jacket, and as a small brown person is basically invisible. She doesn't really show up in this little section that I'm going to read, except for it's her voice telling the story, but I just wanted to give you that as a bit of background. So the only thing I guess you need to know is that this happens shortly after a big shootout at what was then called the Chinese Opera House. And it was a big shootout for which Mott Duck and the Hips and Chong were widely believed to be responsible. So, and I've tried to keep it in 10 minutes, but let me know. All right. Scarcely out of his late 20s, Mott Duck was already a local legend. His dead, expressionless eyes gazed from the backs of playing cards and souvenir matchboxes. Street urchins sang ditties in his honors. They said he could hear a pin drop, see around corners, and that his rhinoceros thick skin protected him from injury. But I wanted to find out who he really was, what fueled his enmity with the Anlians, and most importantly, whether he truly believed he could flaunt all the rules so brazenly and get away with it. I waited a week or so for the dust to settle, during which time my editor kept me busy with mindless tasks, and it became clear that while the Hips had definitely caused the carnage at the theater and fired without warning on their rivals, Mott would not be arrested. Not only had no one seen him at the theater, his alibi was unassailable. When the shooting occurred, he had been bailing out a couple of friends right under the noses of the cops at the police station. It was almost too rich, as though he was daring the authorities to catch him. As I scoured the newspaper's morgue for old reports, I discovered that this was a pattern with Mott. Although he'd been implicated in and arrested for dozens of crimes, he always managed to produce a watertight alibi or hire expert lawyers and argue his way out of the situation. In one instance, when he was identified by a white witness, Mott maintained that the witness must be mistaken, since all Chinese look the same to Americans. His various strategies paid off. He had never yet been convicted. I returned to Chinatown on a slow afternoon. All around me, the city was growing. Buildings shot up like weeds. Chains for the Manhattan Bridge dangled expectantly above the East River, and further north, the two sides of the bridge to Queens strained to connect in the middle. Elevated trains clattered overhead on the Bowery, and I recalled a story I had heard at the Observer. One of the reporters had been on a train when Mott entered his carriage, which was empty, save for a drunk who was fast asleep, lolled across three seats. Mott took one look at the inebriate, picked him up, and coolly tossed him out onto the platform as though he was a sack of potatoes. Then he brushed off his hands, opened a newspaper, and began to read. Never seen anything like it, the reporter said. The fellow couldn't have hurt a fly, and still Mott couldn't resist dumping him. As I neared Chatham Square, I wondered whether I was in over my head, whether the leader of this hip-sing tongue was best left to other, more hardened types. I reminded myself that I hadn't done anything yet. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I hadn't written a word. I was only getting a lay of the land. A uniformed roundsman patrolled the square between Doyers Street and the Bowery. Workers in black trousers and tunics hauled bundles, while passengers hurried back and forth from the station. The roundsman beckoned a vendor with an imperious gesture of his hand, spoke a few sharp words, examined the unfamiliar vegetables in the man's basket, and started to haggle over the price of leafy greens. A childish voice chortled, and I looked over to see a little girl in bright pink pantaloons, hair festooned with pink ribbons, riding on her father's shoulders. She was about 5 or 6 years old and was pulling his ears to direct his gaze. He was slim, with chiseled cheekbones, and dressed like most of the other men in loose black trousers, black canvas slippers, and a black tunic with a high collar. He wore a black skull cap, and his hair was pulled into a bun. A train rumbled out, and the father raised his arm, pointed at the carriages, and began counting them one by one in English. The little girl repeated the numbers after him, enunciating carefully. The pair were lost in their own world, and for a moment, memories of home came rushing back. Then I tore my attention away and moved on to Doyers. The street possessed a curious, run-down charm, despite the horror that had recently occurred there. 3- and 4-story wooden tenements leaned in towards each other, so close they seemed to be whispering secrets. And the bend was a result, or so it was said, of the path of a stream that had once flowed there. Whatever the cause, it was a welcome respite from the unyielding right-angled grid that had taken hold further uptown. A couple of grim-looking fellows appeared from behind the curve. My pulse quickened and I averted my eyes, minding my own business. We passed each other without incident. Mott lived a few doors down and across the street from the theater, right on the curve at number 10. It was an unremarkable tenement, not unlike its unremarkable neighbors. To my surprise, there was nothing the slightest bit distinctive about it. Nothing to indicate that it was home to one of the city's most notorious highbinders. A flea-bitten mutt groomed itself on the strip of sidewalk outside, and a shingle painted with a camera and the words "Wu's Photography" hung by the front door. From its windows, you could get a clear view of the theater, now barricaded. If Mott happened to be at home, I didn't want him to notice me, so I hurried on to tell. Shops were open and people were out. Signs hung everywhere, both vertically and horizontally, from awnings, balconies, fire escapes, and grills attached to walls and lampposts. A ragged urchin approached, his hand outstretched. I threw in a penny. A fellow pushed a wheelbarrow loaded high with crates of chickens. I could have been in Canton, I could have been in Calcutta, but I had to remain on my guard. Across from me, its name painted in bright gold letters on a green awning, the Hung Farlow restaurant was a reminder of a recent tragedy. A few years previously, a vat of grease in the kitchen had caught fire, and An Leong, who was asleep in the dormitory above, awoke to find his bed engulfed by flames and hurled himself off the balcony. Neighbors said his skull shattered the instant it hit the sidewalk. He had been slated to testify against Mott in a murder trial. Mott, who was in jail at the time, told reporters that he could hardly be responsible for the man's death. He wasn't some magician who could kill his enemies from behind bars. He couldn't make things happen just by wishing them into existence. And with the chief witness against him gone, the city's case against Mott crumbled. He walked out of jail, a free man, as he had done on numerous occasions.
One more time for Radha. Yeah. Hey, you know how there's that line in that movie, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown"? You know, let's change that. Let's make it, "Remember it, it's Chinatown." Hey. Okay, I want to tell you about our next reader-writer. It's Henry Chang. What else do you need to know? He's a native New Yorker, a son of Manhattan's Chinatown. His Detective Jack U investigative series has been widely acclaimed and translated into Italian, French, and Chinese. Here's Henry.
Thank you, Ed. I'll pay you later. I was wondering what to read. I was trying to decide whether to drop something really brutal and murderous, beta, or just take it easy. So I decided to drop some bodies. This is from Red Jade, and it begins. The door at the top of the first flight of rickety stairs was slightly ajar. Yellow crime scene tape crossed its frame. Jack pulled the tape back and took a breath. He pushed the door gently, stepping into the space illuminated by dim fluorescent light. The old apartment was a typical Chinatown walk-up, a big rectangular room, sparsely furnished, with a kitchenette and a small bathroom against a long wall. Worn linoleum covered the floor. The rest of the space was open. A little table nestled in the corner to his left, a puffy jacket draped over a chair. The place looked neat. There were no signs of a struggle. Even in the half light, Jack saw them right away. Two bodies, holding hands, but sprawled apart on their backs, across the width of a bed in the far corner. Their legs dangled off the side of the bed. One man, one woman. Chinese, as far as he could make out in the shadowy distance. The woman still had her quilted coat on. There was a lady's handbag placed neatly against the foot of the bed. On the linoleum at the headboard end was a small clock radio, crashed tilted at an angle to the floor, its digital display frozen at 4:44 a.m. As he stepped closer, he figured the dead couple to be in their mid-30s. He couldn't find a pulse, but the bodies were still warm to the touch. Rigor had not set in. Dead less than 2 hours, Jack thought. He pulled the plastic disposable camera from his jacket. The man still had 2 fingers of his right hand on the butt of a gun, a small black revolver, just at the end of his grasp, dangling askew off the duvet cover. He was grimacing. Dark blood spread from the back of his head. In the firm grip of his left fist was the woman's right hand, their fingers laced, as if he were taking her with him somewhere. There was blood on the back of her right hand, blood on the comforter that had come from inside her palm, and a small red hole in the center of her forehead. Beneath that, a dark puddle had formed in the turned-up collar of her coat. Her eyes were open, and and her lips slightly parted. She wore a look of disbelief. In the space between the two bodies was a crumpled business card. Protruding from the man's shirt pocket was a folded piece of notepaper. Jack stepped back and snapped photographs from different angles and distances, wide shots and close-ups, fixing the images in his mind before the crime scene guys arrived. At 4:44 a.m., the woman wasn't going out, Jack thought. She'd just come home, and he was waiting for her, his jacket draped over the chair. No sign of forced entry. He'd had a key, or she let him in. The layout of the bodies made it look like she'd sat down at the edge of the bed, placed her handbag on the floor, and then he'd shot her. She'd fallen straight back, nestled neatly into the comforter. Dead on impact, a bullet in her brain, the back of her head bleeding out, he concluded. Sometime after, the man had seated himself, taken her hand in his, and then ate the gun. Jack imagined it with a cold clarity, the gun jerking out of the man's mouth, the wild swing of his arm smashing into the clock radio, sending it to the floor, the revolver bouncing, sliding onto the comforter. The crashed clock radio on the floor was blinking 4:44 a.m., offering the three worst numbers a Chinese could get, the number 4 in Cantonese sounding like death, triple death. The man had dropped twisted to his right, as if he were dragging her into the next life, holding hands toward oneness with the universe. The gun was an older model, HR 622, a .22 caliber revolver that fit the Saturday Night Special profile. Someone had filed off the serial numbers. Only 2 shots had been fired. With such a cheap revolver, he'd have to have shot her at close range, almost point blank. There'd probably be some gunshot residue on her face, and a hand as well. Jack made a mental note to advise crime scene and the ME, then carefully spread open the crumpled up business card. It was from the Golden Galaxy karaoke bar, with a handwritten telephone number scrawled across the back. Jack snapped photos front and back and checked his watch. 6:06 a.m. There was nothing in the man's jacket draped on the chair. Jack took the note from the man's shirt pocket and opened it up on the table. The word characters were written out in broken lines like a Chinese poem in a 3 Kingdom period style. Jack mouthed the words silently, reading through the series of vertical sentences using his schoolboy Cantonese. Black clouds have covered the sky like ink. The whirlwind sweeps in from the rivers. Even the air itself is frozen. Inside, a growing sorrow I cannot bear. There is no one to turn to, not even a reflection in the mirror. I cannot face anyone. A man without a face, I am ready to do what I must do. The man had lost face, most I mean, and had become despondent, a hopeless predicament according to the poem. Overwhelmed, he'd given in to despair. Jack pushed back from the table, turned toward the bed. The scene looked like a textbook open and shut murder-suicide, one that any one of the murder cops could have stepped up to, way before he got the call. Even a sergeant and a couple of uniforms could have managed it. I'm going to leave that there, and you're going to have to read the book. Wait. You never know, the guy gets lucky. Maybe he gets lucky in love. So I like to just add a little end to this. The Golden Star. Does anybody remember the Golden Star Bar and Grill? Otherwise known as Grandpa's? I know there's a couple of you here, but it's before your time, most of you are. Okay, so the Golden Star was getting crowded. and Jack paid the tab, offering to walk Alexandra home. They went out into the winter night and linked, and she linked her arm through his as they walked. She didn't seem concerned about entanglements anymore. "Come up for some sambuca," she said. It came out soft but sounded like a command. "You think?" he asked, still wondering about the rumor of her boyfriend. "Yeah, well, you have an outstanding rain check. You need to cash it in before something else happens," she insisted. "Okay then," Jack agreed. "Good to go." They were quiet, walking the last block before they came to the gates of Confucius Towers. Alex led the way past the doorman guard in the lobby. At the elevator, she took Jack's hand, led him in, and tapped the button for the 33rd floor. A lucky Yang number, Jack thought. The interior of the elevator was a bright yellow, and they both knew that they were covered by the surveillance camera, exchanging little smiles as they were whisked upward. The camera couldn't see that she was squeezing his hand inside hers. Inside 33C, Alex hit a switch, and the lights went low, and music started playing softly from somewhere. Jack could see it was kind of a Chinatown apartment that only well-to-do Chinese could afford. Large picture window with a high-rise view, granite countertops in the kitchen, and arranged feng shui living space, a place he and his pa could never have afforded. Alexandra draped her red jacket on a chair, and Jack did the same with his. She gave him a hug and started the espresso machine. There were family photos and children's books on the shelves, law books on one side. Alex wouldn't have brought him up if her daughter had been there. There were art pieces and drawings on the walls. He could smell the coffee as he watched her bring the sambuca out, setting designer coffee cups on the countertop. He remembered the night in Seattle and Alexandra in gold lingerie. Quietly, she came up close, and the kiss she gave him made him forget all about the boyfriend, made him forget Seattle and the pain in his shoulder and the emptiness in his soul. He pulled her close, like he wanted to do in his dream, and heart to heart, and felt her softness against him. He took a Shaolin breath and pressed his lips to hers, a slow, smoldering kiss that felt like it was for real and meant something more than just alcoholic surrender to desperate need. They took their time slow dancing to the low music. The words ended, and then they spoke with their eyes and hands. And along the way toward the bedroom, Jack had a hopeful feeling that things were going to be all right, that maybe his hard-hearted cynicism was misguided, and the risks he'd taken were worthwhile after all.
One more time for Henry. I will never understand how such grim words and imagery can come from such a nice guy. I want to tell you about our next reader. Born in the Bronx, S.J. Rozan lives in Lower Manhattan. Her 19 novels and 80-plus short stories have won multiple awards, including the Edgar, Shamu, Anthony, Seamus, Shamu's the Whale, Nero, McAvity, and Japanese Maltese Falcon. She's received Life Achievement Awards from the Private Eye Writers of America and the Short Mystery Fiction Society. S.J. teaches and lectures widely, including an annual summer workshop in Assisi, Italy. artworkshopintl.com. Her newest books are The Mayors of New York and The Murder of Mr. Ma. Here's S.J.
Yeah, let's. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I got to know these guys, Ed and Henry especially, with my series of books that I'm still writing, which is Lydia Chin. She's a private eye here in Chinatown. But I'm not reading from that tonight. I'm reading from a new book, The Murder of Mr. Ma, for a couple of reasons. One, it is my newest, and two, it is the one that You and Me Books has here, and you all need to buy all the books here and support You and Me. And three, it does have a Chinatown connection, and that is when I started working on this series with my partner John Nee, who is my writing partner. The books are set in London in 1924. It's a Holmes and Watson kind of setup. The Holmes is Judge Dee. You all know Judge Dee. Well, we just brought him forward from the Chang dynasty about 1,000 years. We thought he'd enjoy it. And Lao She, who was a Chinese writer, a real guy, who was in London at the time, and he's the narrator. And we needed for this book and for the series a Kung Fu consultant, because there's a lot of Kung Fu in here. John and I are both, so we found one. And the one we found is a gentleman named Paul Coe, Master Coe, who teaches on Eldridge, up the street there, Eldridge and Grand. And he choreographed the Kung Fu that is coming here. I'm going to read you chapter 7, and it's Lao She who is narrating. Dee strode up Church Lane in the direction of Commercial Road. I wondered where we were going next. I'd have asked, but I fell behind as he slid along the crowded pavement like an eel through reeds, while I was continually jostled and bumped. When I caught him up, it was as before. I had no chance to speak because Dee spoke first. Lao, he said in patient tones, I recognize you're unfamiliar with even the fundamentals of investigation, but surely you possess more common sense than you've so far displayed. I was stung. I don't know what you mean. When we were with the widow, he said, the questions you asked led her in the direction of your thinking. He wove around two ladies and their shopping baskets. You will learn a good deal more if you keep your theories to yourself and allow your subject to choose the path. 3 laughing street children chased each other past us. Then, when we were with Li Zirong, you almost blurted that what the widow told us contradicted what he had just said. Do you deny it? I drew myself up. I do not blurt. That aside, what harm could there be in his knowing their recollections differ? Perhaps none, or perhaps a good deal. Knowledge is power, to be guarded until its use is necessary. Like that? Okay. A young man on the pavement stumbled into us, apologized, and went his way. Also, Dee continued, you must be aware of your surroundings at all times. Really, Dee, as a writer, I like to think my powers of observation are a cut or two above the average. Ah, then you will have noticed your wallet has just been lifted. What? I thrust my hand in my jacket pocket. It was empty. Dee was off like a shot. I attempted to follow closely, but abandoned the idea when I saw Dee leap in the air, seize a lamppost, and swing himself over the heads of several people. He dropped down and disappeared. I continued along in a more conventional way, making for the disturbance I could hear rippling through the crowd ahead. Now here we come to the first of those episodes about which I warned you at the opening of this book. I was not present for the chase and capture that led to the retrieval of my wallet. Retrieve it Dee did, and I will paint you the picture of how he went about it. Because I didn't observe the events myself, this picture is necessarily speculative. And with Dee, I had a further difficulty. It wasn't easy to persuade him to describe to me the proceedings I hadn't witnessed. In his eyes, these events had no bearing upon our quest for justice for Ma Zeren, although, as we shall eventually see, they did yield other fruit, and therefore, once completed, were no longer of interest. By the time I'd found him and he handed me back my property, Dee was anxious to reach our next destination. It was only in short bursts as we hurried along that he told me what had happened. This disjointed account I have stitched into a workable narrative, enabling me, before I recount our next interview, to bring you the wallet adventure. D was off like a shot. Leaping, he seized a lamppost, swung himself over the heads of several people, and landed lightly on the pavement, to the astonished gasps of men and women and the dumbfounded delight of two small boys, who'd never before seen a robe-clad Chinese man fall from the sky. He spotted the thief and raced after him as the young man turned a sharp corner into a winding street. D put on a burst of speed and grasped the fellow by the shoulders. He spun him around and threw him to the ground. No sooner had he done so than he found himself surrounded by a gang of hooligans. Stepping from the doorways and curbs where they'd been loitering, they threw away their cigarettes and flexed their hands. "Here," called one of them, "what's this?" D, standing over the thief, looked about him and smiled. "First," he recounted, having thought, "I was arrested and rescued by an aristocrat and a countryman. Then I encountered Sergeant Hung. And now here is a situation for which Hung's father so well prepared me. Truly, London is a wondrous place." He pointed at the ruffians one at a time and counted aloud. "Yi, er, san, si, wu, liu." Perplexed, they stared. "Here's a right queer Chinese," said one. "Come on, lads, let's give him a good thrashing." With that, they began to close in. Avoiding the fellow on the pavement, whose mouth hung agape, D stepped back into a bow stance, stretching his right arm behind him, hand in a fist, and his left to the front in the tiger claw bridge. In his mind, he heard Master Hung's words. When confronting multiple opponents, the long-handed technique of the swinging wave punch should be used to its maximum potential. The biggest of the gang, the one who'd suggested the thrashing, snorted and came at D with a wild kick to the midsection. D shifted his body left to avoid the kick and smashed his forearm just under the man's kneecap. The ruffian gave a high-pitched yelp and swung a furious right-handed haymaker. D ducked, followed with a swinging punch, and then slammed his right and left hand successively under the chin of his opponent. He delivered the coup de grace of a tidal wave punch upon the hooligan's jaw. The big man fell to the pavement, knocked out cold. D straightened and spoke to the rest of the gang. "Shall we stop this?" All the thugs hesitated. After a moment, one of them stuck his chest out. "Like hell we will." With that, he and a second man exploded toward D. D shrugged, then used his left forearm to deflect the oncoming blow of the first attacker. He snagged the man's hand and smashed his arm. The second thug lunged in. D spun between the two. They stared in disbelief as he unleashed a double whipping strike, left and right arms outstretched. Catching each in the back of the skull, he sent them both face down into the muck and mire of the cobblestone street. Another assailant, not as tall as the first, but heavier by half, charged in. D deflected his punch with a swinging left hand and slammed the lumbering man in the groin with his right. Swiftly, D spun behind him, executing a crashing elbow strike to his head. The moaning man dropped to his knees, hands between his legs. D fixed his gaze upon the remaining two members of the gang, prepared for the next attack. The pair looked at each other. As one, they turned tail and dove into the crowd. It was at this point that I, pushing through the spectators, finally reached D, and thus I'm now able to continue my narration. I found D standing over the supine figure of a thin, cowering young Englishman, none other than the man who had stumbled into us. 4 other men, more bruisers than he, lay on the cobbles in various states of disarray, while 2 more toughs could be seen slinking away through the crowd. "Please, sir," the quaking young man said, "I didn't mean no harm. Your friend there," he nodded at me, "he was just such easy pickings, and I haven't eaten a proper meal in days, have I?" From his position on the stones, he reached out to D, my wallet prominently in his hand. D took the wallet and said, "Is it your habit to commit a crime each time you're hungry?" "It ain't an easy life, sir." "No," said D, "I imagine it isn't. I should summon the constabulary on behalf of my friend here." "Oh, no, please, sir. The nick don't suit me, that it don't." "Does it not?" D gave the man a thoughtful look. "Well, there may be another way. If you were employed, I suppose you would have no reason to steal?" "Oh, no, sir. If I could fill my belly with an honest day's labor, you can. I am engaged upon an investigation of a serious nature. There will be certain information I'll need, and you may be in a position to obtain it. If you bring me reports from time to time on subjects I'll ask about, you'll be rewarded. How does that sound?" "Why, it sounds first rate." The thief jumped to his feet. How will I find you? If I need you, I'll find you. What's your name? Jim, sir, Jim Finney, but the lads call me Jimmy Fingers. And where do you live, Jimmy Fingers? Silver Street, sir, in Stepney. Ain't that a joke? Haven't seen a piece of silver since I came there, that I haven't. All right, Jimmy Fingers, now take this. Dion snapped my wallet's purse and took out half a crown. Here's silver, go fill your belly. Yes, sir, thank you, sir. The thief turned to go and then turned back. And may I say, sir, watching you fight and leap and swing through the air, even though it were me you was chasing, it was a privilege. Until I saw you was Chinese, I thought you was Spring-Heel Jack himself. Who is that? Inquired Dee. Oh, come now, sir. Surely you'll have heard of Spring-Heel Jack, the terror of London. No, said Dee, I haven't. Perhaps that's a deficit I ought to remedy. Come, Lau. He handed me my wallet and proceeded through the crowd. Yet again, I hurried after.
Time for a quick break. 5 minutes?
All right, 5 minutes. We apologize.